Good day. My name is Colin Taylor, and in this webinar, we're going to be discussing the customer experience and really what makes the best organizations the best. So we'll be going through this as a screen share. So if you have any questions or comments, please be sure to let us know. First, a little bit about myself and the organization. As I said, my name is Colin Taylor, and I am the Chairman and Chief Chaos Officer for the Taylor Reach Group. We are an award-winning call, contact center, and customer experience consulting firm. The company was established in 2003. And what we do is we help our clients improve the operational effectiveness and efficiency of their customer-facing organizations. Most commonly, that involves call or contact centers, but could be involving technical support groups or even the social media outreach. All of our consultants have a minimum of 20 years of hands-on operational experience. We are vendor agnostic, which is to say that we do not take money from anyone but our clients. So we're not in the pocket of any technology or outsource vendors. The company is based in the Toronto area, which happens to be just where I live, but we also have offices in New York, Atlanta, Phoenix, Ottawa, Cork, Sydney, and Beijing. So what is the customer experience, or as we will often refer to it during the session, CX? Well, the formal industry definition for the customer experience is how customers perceive their interactions with your company. IBM defined it as the designed interaction between an organization and an individual. And CX includes all channels of communications and interactions and all touch points. Just some interesting facts regarding customer experience. I won't walk through all of these, but certainly the fact that 86% of consumers are willing to pay more for an upgraded or superior service should speak loudly to all marketers out there. And if they can differentiate based on customer experience, then there's an opportunity to recoup a premium in terms of price and revenues. 85% of all customer churn is due to poor service that was preventable. 11% of customer churn could be prevented simply by the company extending outreach and contacting those disaffected or unhappy customers. And 67% of customer churn is preventable if a customer issue could be resolved on the very first contact or first engagement. That really underscores the importance of first contact resolution, or as it's termed, FCR. 78% of consumers actually expect to get an answer from some form of self-service, be that on the web or through an IVR or interactive voice response unit. And just 1 out of 26 customers will actually complain. Most of them will vote with their feet. 84% of all social media interactions have to be escalated to other channels for resolution. It's just not possible to resolve a refund publicly on Twitter, for example. So, and while we may believe that there is a bias in terms of various contact channels, in fact, more than 2/3, 67% of customers really don't care what channel is being used. 34% of companies at this point have undertaken a customer journey mapping exercise. 2% have reported success in that process. And 72% have said that customer journey mapping really has missed their needs. And that, I think, speaks to a broader understanding about how inclusive the customer experience must be. It has to be all touch points and all interactions. And further, it has to be from the customer's perspective. It can't just be what we want them to be thinking about us. We can, in part, influence their perceptions and their expectations, but their perceptions and expectations are also going to be influenced by online reviews, the experiences of their friends, and their own experiences with other, perhaps unrelated firms and organizations, and possibly even different verticals. 58% of companies doing customer engagement, with all the definitions they've used, but less than 1% of companies can actually measure their level of customer engagement. So certainly there's some very positive and strong opportunities for organizations that can execute customer experience very well. But there are also huge risks, and there is a lot of wreckage on the path to success. As we look at customer experience, and we try and keep it fairly simple. It's really three elements. Do customers get value without difficulty? That's ease. Can customers get value from the experience? Is it effective? And do customers feel good about the experience? That's emotion. So ease, emotion, and effectiveness, or the three E's, are really core tenets to any customer experience initiative. And each of these can be exploded and down to a far more minute level and can be rolled back up to those three. So the customer experience perception of the customer is based on emotion, ease, and effectiveness. And these can further be expanded to suggest that under emotion, was the agent they spoke with empathetic? Did they understand where the customer was coming from? Is a website visually appealing? Or was the ambience in the store and the environment pleasant? From the ease perspective, was the order process quick? Was the product information clear and readily available? Was help available in an accessible context, either from an associate in the store, or from FAQs, or from a helpful chat option which presented itself? And was it effective? What was the effectiveness? Was the right item offered? Was essential product information available? Was required help provided? From a contact center perspective, we might equate that to, was the agent knowledgeable about the product or services that we were discussing? Now, Taylor Reach, from our own perspective, has developed a slight variation on this as we look at call and contact centers. And really, each customer interaction can be viewed across three different dimensions that'll have the greatest impact on the customer's perceptions, opinions, and experience of dealing with that agent in that contact center environment. Was the agent able to make an emotional connection with the customer? Did they get it? Were they empathetic? Were they able to make a rational connection? And from that perspective, we're really talking about, were they knowledgeable? Did they know the products? Did they know the policies? And customer effort, how difficult was it to actually get to that right agent who was able to help the customer out? If we have to force them to go through 14 levels on an IVR, or have to transfer the call 5 times, we certainly have created barriers and restrictions and increased the amount of effort the customer is needed to invest. Now, we know intuitively that better service and better experiences improve the customer relationship. And I've got some nice graphics here, some slides from HBR. The first one on the top left shows the customer experience drives sales, and it actually reflects a 140% increase in sales versus the poorest experience. And this is based on analysis done which looked at the customer experience score and the annual revenues of those same customers. The lower right example really talks about the customer experience driving membership. So as we look at things from a subscription perspective, we see that based on the customer experience score, the predicted future membership or subscription in years increases on a very strong correlation. Over 400% 10-year increase versus the poorest experience scores. So we can see that there is dollar value available to organizations that are able to deliver that better experience as judged by their customers. But why improve the customer experience? Well, we want to improve retention and recover potentially lost customers. We want to engage existing customers, improving their satisfaction. We want to increase cross-sell and upsell opportunities and their success. We want to reduce the cost of new customer acquisition. We know that engaged customers and increased employee satisfaction leads to increased customer engagement and customer satisfaction, and that strongly correlates with a strong increase in customer experience. And we want to reduce the cost of the feedback infrastructure. We want to make it easier for customers to tell us how we're doing. In the graphic that's shown here, courtesy of Genesis, we see the top 3 reasons why businesses proactively manage and invest in the customer experience. And that is 1, to improve customer retention. Number 2 was to improve overall customer satisfaction. And number 3 was to increase cross-selling and upselling. Certainly 1 and 3 directly correlate to increased revenues. And number 2 relates to a secondary relationship to increased loyalty, stickiness, and retention. Gartner reports that by 2016, 89% of marketing leaders surveyed expect to compete mostly on the basis of customer experience. And top, firms that are ranked as top in delivering CX reap huge rewards. 79% of customer experience leaders report better financial results than their competitors, while only 55% of customer experience laggards can report the same. That was a finding from the Temkin Group study in 2015. And if we look at Forrester's Customer Experience Index online survey from the same year, we see the brands that ranked tops in customer experience. And there's a lot of familiar names that are well regarded as having excellent customer experience for those customers that interact with them. USAA has 4 mentions on this top list, which is quite incredible. The distribution of CX index scores, again from Forrester, shows an interesting curve. The smallest number reported on this slide show that almost nobody is doing an excellent job. There are a number who are doing a good job, even though that number has actually declined in the 3rd quarter versus the 1st. We'll see that about half or just over half of the firms participating are doing an okay job. Yet that leaves 20 to 25% that are doing a poor or a very poor job based on those almost 300 firms that were surveyed. Oftentimes, marketers look at the customer experience from more of a marketing perspective, and the call or contact center is often not a focal point in their designs and their developments. And frankly, this can be a fatal flaw. And why is that? Well, more than 50% of consumer interactions take place through a contact center. If we look at the first channel that individuals employ to communicate with the organization, the graphic on the left, we're seeing that the call center is the first channel 35% of the times, followed by website, branch or retail. IVR, which is directly connected and usually a part of the call or contact center, is 12%. So if we add that to our 35, we're up to 47%. We can then add email and chat, also channels that terminate and are processed through a contact center. And the channel preference really varies by vertical, and it also varies based on the level of complexity of the issue. And this is the complexity as perceived by the customer. So as we can see in these 2 charts, if something is deemed to be not very complex or non-complex on the lower chart, we see that in that case, only in the case of satellite and cable or ISP is call center the first choice. And that may very well be because if you have a cable modem or your internet service provider's down, it's a little hard to get support through the web. But for other channels which the service is presumed to be available, wireless, credit card, healthcare technology, etc., the first channel choice there is web. But it changes dramatically when we have a complex issue. And I think this really reflects human nature. Tasks that we believe are easy or simple or straightforward, we're quite happy to interact with technology to achieve our objectives. But as soon as we think that something is broken or messed up, we really want to talk to a human being. So in every one of those sectors we talked about a moment ago, with the exception of technology, call center becomes the first channel choice for complex issues. And that's over 50 to even over 60% of the cases. Now, in most organizations, the customer experience teams are quite small. Temkin found that that the number of full-time employees is generally at least 6, but you can see that the biggest single percentage there is between 3 to 5, and then 6 to 10 would be the next one. Some very large organizations also have large teams with 15% representing more than 50 individuals dedicated to the company's customer experience. Executive priorities for CX leaders versus laggards can also shed a great deal of light in terms of what they're focusing on. And we can see that you know, making if you're a leader, then one of the key priorities you're going to be having is making the company's culture more customer-centric. You'll be looking at fixing customer experience problems with over 85 and almost 90% respectively, versus less than half of the laggards focusing on that. There is some strong alignment in a number of areas where the laggards and leaders respond similarly. Increasing customer retention, acquiring new customers, selling more to existing customers, and improving profitability are all areas where both groups align. But I think that we can probably glean more from the variances than we can from the similarities here. Most organizations are still early on in this customer experience journey. You know, in terms of you know, how many people really view themselves as industry leaders. It's a very small number, 7%. But how do we expect their CX to be described in 3 years? And we can see that 55% really want to become industry leaders. So there's still lots of gains to be had in the entire milieu for customer experience. Now, we've used the term customer experience, and a couple of times I've mentioned the term customer centricity, but let's really dig down a little bit in terms of what customer centricity means. It means letting the customer define the engagement. That is the channels they want to use. We want to make sure that they have control, that they can exert over the engagement. We want to put them in charge, if you will. We want to engineer problems out as much as possible in terms of employing things like proactive notifications and actions to anticipate question points that the customer may have regarding an order or an activity set. And we want to have the ability to self-serve wherever it's desired by the customer, not where it's desired by the organization or where we think we can reduce cost, but where it actually makes sense. And where customers want to have that self-service capability, we want to make sure it's there. And we want to recognize the customer through listening and responding to their queries, their comments, and their interactions. We want to acknowledge their importance. And customer centricity really is a common tenet of all successful CX programs. There is, you know, this is an interesting exercise I ask client firms to go through, is really to look at what words we use and use that as a bit of a thumbnail to determine how customer-centric we really are. Are we speaking about the short-term relationship, or are we looking at long-term outcomes? Are we talking about the message or the content? Are we managing expectations, or simply or do we expect that we have communicated them, there be known expectations by the customer? Are we talking about an interaction? Are we talking about an experience? All the words we use, as true in so much in life, can really speak a lot about how we are approaching the customer experience, and customer centricity. Is the focus on us, the company, or is the focus on them, the customer? So if we drill down in terms of some of these and use some of these words, if we look at transactions versus long-term value, the top customer experience companies are focusing on long-term value. They're focusing on engagement. They're focusing on upsell and cross-sell where and when it's appropriate. They're using recommendations and making recommendations that are relevant and helpful to the customer. They're not just about getting that next order. They set and manage customer expectations collaboratively with their customers. They trust their customers, they know their customers, and most importantly, perhaps they listen to their customers. and they give their frontline agents or customer-facing staff the authority and the responsibility to take actions and make decisions based on delivering that long-term relationship and long-term value for the customer. A focus on short-term or a transactional view, if you will, tends to lead to generic messaging. You know, every customer is a prospect rather than being a customer. We're engaged in selling to somebody and not speaking with or dialogue or having a dialogue with a customer. There's distrust, often on both sides. There is discomfort in the process. There's a lot of friction. Policies and procedures seem to stand in the way of what the customer is trying to do. And it really tends to be a one-size-fits-all with hard and fast rules rather than a dynamic relationship where there can be some give and take on either side. So let's talk a little bit about the best customer experience organizations and some of their traits. Leading customer experience organizations have a strong senior leadership support. They tend to have a clear, concise vision, a touchstone, and a mantra. They utilize technology. They do it to engineer problems out, to simplify workflows, and they allow for self-service where it's appropriate and where their customers want to have it and utilize it. They proactively fix service problems. It has been said by some organizations that the best service is no service, and that means that if you actually have to experience their support, then they've done something wrong in the design of the process. They optimize their processes. They deliver consistency across their set of interactions. They have customer-friendly policies. The policies and procedures aren't there to protect the organization from the customer, but are there to enable the customer to have a more satisfying and meaningful relationship with the organization. And they have effective workflows that make sense, are logical, and take no longer than they need to. Leading organizations use culture. They have a clear vision. They require buy-in at all levels of the organization. It's easily articulated and understood, but by everyone from the CEO to the frontline agent that started last week in the call center. The culture is reinforced in their hiring, their training, and their performance reviews. It's really made simple and straightforward, and it's translatable or applicable to all types of interactions. You will be able to look at calls and listen to calls that have been taken, and you can actually identify where culture has impacted on that dialogue. And culture has a personality. It becomes the empty chair in the room that is always there. The leading organizations also build engagement. They take the time to get to know the customer. They develop the knowledge and make it accessible to the frontline staff and to the customer through things like CRM and FAQs. They know that building engagement requires training, it requires listening, and it requires the ability and empowerment to solve problems. It's a common fear in many organizations that if they provide authority and empowerment to their frontline staff, the frontline staff will, quote, give away the store. In reality, where organizations have increased levels of empowerment and autonomy for the frontline staff, they generally see a reduction in freebies or refunds or giveaways because the agents tend to reward that empowerment by treating it like it's their own money. And they want to ensure that only those who are truly entitled to it receive it. And they know that building engagement requires sacrificing short-term gains for long-term relationships and the benefits that accrue there. So what are some of the primary customer experience contact center strategies in place today? Well, the call centers first, they could be in-house or captive, and the center is staffed and operated within that company or organization, or they could be entirely outsourced with 100% of the contact management actively handled by an outsourced or third-party contact center organization. And of course, there can also be hybrids, where the organization employs both an in-house or captive center and outsourced resources. There are a number of hybrid models, but often they'll allocate activity based on geography. In-house for the domestic service in the US, for example, and outsourced elsewhere in the world. Or it may be defined by customer segment. high-valued customers are serviced in-house, and lower-valued customers through the outsourced firm. The profile of best customer experience contact centers against these three criteria: American Express, they're both in-house and hybrid. Amazon also uses the hybrid model. Nike is outsourced, while Zappos and USAA are both firms that have adopted an in-house or captive center market. So all three approaches can be successful and can be viable, but different effort and investment is required to be successful for each of them. So key considerations if you're looking at outsourced or a hybrid model: you need to have a clear service vision. You need to be able to define it and make it accessible, much as we spoke about culture earlier. And there has to be that cultural fit between the organizations. You can't have an internal view that will do anything to keep the customer happy and then have an outsourced contract that mandates tight adherence to restrictive or even punitive KPIs. You must have a good alignment to the service vision and goals between the organizations, and a focused agreement must support that alignment. You need to create a branded environment for the frontline staff and agents within that outsourced environment. You want them to feel that they work for that organization and not for the outsourcer whose name happens to be on their paycheck. Now, cost is a factor in any of these, in any decision to have a center insourced or outsourced, but it should not be the only or the key criteria. And in most cases, it's usually number 2 or 3 on the list, which is probably about where it should belong. Now, different organizations, have not only chosen different approaches to get to be the best in terms of whether it's an in-house, captive, or outsourced / hybrid approach, but we also can look at them across their environments and whether they're a legacy firm or really a purpose-built organization, and whether their service philosophy is, as Amazon, which has been characterized as being no service, and by that, as I referred to a few moments ago, if you actually need to deal with their call or contact centers, then they failed in anticipating or identifying problems in their process or workflow. To the other extreme, which would be a high-touch organization, something like Zappos, that looks at each and every interaction with their call or contact center as an opportunity to create a fan and to reinforce the stickiness of that customer relationship. As we look at it across the axis of legacy versus purpose-built, certainly, American Express and Nike have both been around quite a number of years, and their legacy markets and legacy environments, whereas Amazon and Zappos are really more purpose-built. They changed the way we did things in terms of buying product or buying shoes. And some of their mantras I've included here on the right-hand side. Zappos is easy and weird. They're selling service, not shoes, as Tony has been known to say. Nike, it's personal, it's premium, and it's easy. Amex, easy, recognize, and solve is their solution model for dealing with the customer issues and events. So what are some of the implications that organizations need to look at when they're, or think about when they're looking at launching a customer experience project? Well, you need a clear definition of what the customer experience should be. You need leadership's vision needs to be defined. It can't just be a warm fuzzy about being nice to people. It needs to be articulated. We need to know what the budget and financial considerations are. We need to balance the business concerns with the customer experience and the costs. It costs money to interact with your customers. It costs money to build the systems to support those interactions and to design out problems and bottlenecks and roadblocks. You need to complete a customer centricity gap analysis. How customer centric are we? Are we truly a customer centric and customer focused organization, or are we really company centric but give lip service to centricity on the customer side? We need to do alignment mapping within the organization and any outsourced providers we may be utilizing. And we need to make sure that the culture permeates through the organization and the vendor network who are interacting with our customers. We need to ensure outsource agreements support the customer centricity and the alignment. If necessary, we need to identify and recast metrics and reporting to support customer experience. In some organizations, it's fairly simple. We stop worrying about average handle time in our contact center, and we start worrying about customer SAT or CX scores or first contact resolution. And we need to look at the internal outsourcer metrics, quality versus customer experience versus compliance. You know, there are certain elements that you must do on every call, and those are what I'll term quality compliance issues, whereas the quality of the interaction and the experience the customer had are best articulated by the customer. So you'll need those external customer experience surveys, and you'll need to ensure that you have the right metrics in place from a financial perspective to actually track and measure the improvements and the gains that are accruing to the organization through this customer experience program. And then you'll likely need to revise and redevelop your frontline agent training to really reflect that customer centricity and that customer experience focus. So from a customer centricity gap analysis perspective, measure the experience across all the interaction channels. So that's going to be call and contact center, but it's going to be store, it may be through mail, it could be walk-ins if you have customers paying you at the desk, you know, in each of your locations. Look at the experience specifically within the IVR, with the website, with the mobile app, or other private apps you've created, the experience with the outsourced call center across all the channels that they support, be it phone, chat, email, SMS, etc. And what is the experience with the delivery service? You're sending out products, you can do everything right until it falls down in the last mile as you try and get the product to the customer. So you need to understand those experiences across all of those touch points and interactions. The CX design process is illustrated really on this graphic, and it's a cycle. You know, we can start with what customer segments do we want to look at? Who are we going to measure within those segments? What are the experiences we want to measure? What metrics are we going to use to do that measuring? How will we gather the data? How will we establish the targets? We'll then track the results and actions, and that may lead us back to refining or expanding the customer segments, and around we go. If we look at levels of the customer experience from a consumer perspective and from an organizational perspective, I would suggest there's really three tiers. The top tier is the brand level. It is what the customer thinks of the brand. So company X is blank, and they will identify the adjectives that they would use to define that brand from their level of experience and their experience perceptions. But then below that, we have actual different journeys. At the journey level, you know, different processes are going to have different levels of customer experience, and the customers will have different perceptions and feelings about them. One may be the onboarding of registering a new customer. A separate one could very well be placing their first order, doing their first return. These can involve multiple contacts with the organization, which are shown on the interaction level beneath, and these can be individual vignettes, if you will, related to placing an order. It can be a call to the contact center to ask about color availability or stock availability. They could then go online and change their address as they realize that they have the incorrect shipping address there. They may return the product, but then have a billing issue and send an email to the organization. So each one of these levels is the result of the sum of the ones before in whole or in part. So a number of the interactions are going to relate to each of these journeys, and there's many, many more journeys. And the sum of all the journeys really is going to impact on the CX score for the organization at the brand level. So as I said, experience can be characterized three ways: overall brand, a customer, the customer journey, such as placing an order, and discrete interactions, such as a call or a web update of the address. So if we want to look at the design waterfall, we would then look at one, identifying customer segments. Identify or employ existing customer segmentation, perhaps based on value or product or reason for contact, life cycle stage, etc. Then you look at who do we want to measure within that segment. Pick a subgroup within the segment, for, perhaps with high value to the organization. And then look at which experiences do we want to measure. Specific experience of that subgroup within that segment. For example, the life cycle stage new customers on the account setup. Then we need to define the metrics that we're going to use for each experience. So define the source for each metrics and the process for gathering that metric data, because we will be using this as we produce our ROI results and demonstrate our return on investment as the program rolls towards rollout and maturity. So that may be sales data or purchase data. It could be the NPS survey or FCR from the call center or CRM. We need a data gathering model. We need to establish the process and a methodology for gathering the appropriate data and generating the required reporting. This will include determining when to gather data in the journey, the specific data gathering tools such as surveys, etc., the survey design itself, the candidate selection, channel selection, etc. And then we'll get to the results in action stage, as we saw on that cycle graphic earlier, and we'll design and generate reporting that shows the overall performance and surfaces specific customer issues. We'll define a process for analyzing and improving negative customer experience ratings and implement a root cause analysis process to help us to identify what those drivers and causes are and implement changes to our operating processes and procedures or systems to ameliorate these issues. This is very much an iterative process. For specific customer issues, we will need to design a process to address them. So when we look at customer experience scores at the very highest level, those scores will actually tend to hide and to block our view at the journey level or at the interaction level. But by being sure we track and trap metrics and results at both the journey and the interaction level, we'll get very useful tactical data that we can actually use to improve the process and improve those individual customer experiences, which will all roll up to a superior and higher customer experience scores at that top or brand level. Now, one size does not fit all when we look at customer experience. Different customers have different preferences. We can look at at the top-rated firms based on NPS, and for boomers, we'll see LL Bean, and we'll see Amazon and Kohl's and JCPenney and Nordstrom. But if we look at millennials for the same metric of NPS, we get Amazon moves from 2 to 1. Victoria's Secret, which wasn't in the top 5 for the boomers, moves to number 2. Best Buy, also not in the top 5, moves to number 3. Nordstrom moves up from 5 to 4, and Macy's joins the list. And gone from the list are LL Bean and Kohl's. So we must acknowledge that the different customers are going to have different preferences, and we need to design our experience to support our customers. So some key considerations for customer interaction: know who your customer is so you can design the appropriate customer experience for them. Communicate to them what they should expect in the customer interactions. Make sure you are available in all channels the customers want to utilize. As we saw earlier, customer channel preference will change based on their perception of the complexity of the interaction. It will also change based on convenience and location. If I'm sitting on a crowded subway car, then I may prefer to do a text chat on my smartphone rather than actually talk to somebody. Or if I'm going into the underground, I may prefer just to send a text, a text before I get in and look for an answer when I come out of the tunnel. You may have to make sure you are available when the customer wants to interact. So technology today, web services, mobile apps, these are 7/24. But what happens if your customers want to interact with you through your contact center at 2 in the morning? Are you available? Have you actually identified what that cost to provide that always on, always available service would be? And have you made a conscious decision not to do it? Or is it just something you haven't looked at? So we need to be available where they want to interact and when they want to interact. We need to recognize the customer needs. We need to solve the customer's problems, and we need to make judicious use of self-service. Where the customers want self-service, give them self-service, but don't force them to go through a self-service process if it doesn't align with their expectations, their goals, and their desires. As we look at the keys to deploying customer experience programs, alignment of activities to metrics. The other next key would be leadership, stating the CX vision and regularly reinforcing it. This can't just be a memo saying we will have good customer experience starting tomorrow. The vision has to be easy to understand, repeatable statement that all levels of the organization can recite and articulate, and more importantly, understand what that means to them in their role within the organization. And we need to ensure that we're customer-centric versus transactional or company-centric. So what are some of the metrics and measures we would use specifically to measure our customer experience process? This is a great table that charts a number of common metrics in use and shows and provides a description of where they work best. So if we look at shows brand alignment, NPS scores best focused on customers' feelings and perceptions. We can gain that through CXI, CSAT, or customer effort scores. Reactive and focused on aggregate views. Well, that can be CSAT, I should say. Looking at specific moments of truth, we're seeing that in CXI and CES. NPS, it tends to be internally focused in terms of driving internal and external goals and providing feedback on elements of the experience. We see that CXI, CSAT, and CES all do well there. And you can see, the aligns to customer experience cycle and customer journey is perhaps better measured through effort in CXI, as is the ability to relate it to other metrics. So the best measure of customer experience, well, NPS has a high correlation, Temkin found, but we have to also remember that NPS is a hypothetical measure. It is a measure of intention, not events or historical. NPS and CSAT on the acquisition or sales paradigm align virtually the same. It doesn't consider social advantages or any representation of loyalty, but from a pure acquisition sense, there is good correlation there. And CES is both an expansion and a subset on NPS, as it speaks to how easy or difficult we are to do business with. So measuring the CX in the contact center in terms of, and response to the question, what metrics do you use to measure customer experience and loyalty? Customer satisfaction is used by more than half of the organizations and is by far the most prevalent. Customer satisfaction can also be described as being not fact-based, in terms that at the end of an interaction, the customer is believing a set of activities will take place as shared with them by the agent in the contact center, and it is those activities that the customer is satisfied with, but those activities have likely not taken place yet. My billing problem will be resolved because a credit will be posted to my account. Well, I'm satisfied with that if that's what happens. So we have to have a nuanced perspective on customer satisfaction. It is satisfaction with the interaction and the stated activities that are promised, not that have necessarily taken place. NPS is employed by just over a quarter of the centers, and customer effort score is used by about 17%. And customer experience, customer effort scores within call and contact centers will often look at things such as the IVR and the number of steps required to get to an agent, and or the number of holds or transfers that need to be placed when the agent is interacting with the customer. So that's really it for the session today. We need to look at the customer experience as a virtuous cycle. We need to understand that you know, our experience drives feedback, which can drive actionable insight, which can drive performance improvement. I'd like to thank all of you for viewing this webinar today. We have lots more exciting stuff which we'll be sharing in the future related to customer experience and some of the specific attributes of what some of the best companies are doing. So stay tuned for that, and we would welcome your feedback. Let us know if you have any questions or comments on this webinar, and we hope that you found it interesting, informative, and valuable. I'm Colin Taylor, and thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.